Well, hello, friends, and welcome to this webinar, Encountering Church Leadership on Laudato Si. We are more than happy to have over 1,100 people register for this webinar, and I want to do some brief introductions. We'll get into our guest a little bit more in a few minutes, but this is a webinar where I think you're attending because you know that it's very difficult sometimes to get our church leaders, whether be they bishops or pastors or other administrators, engaged in Laudato Si and in caring for our common home. All of you are certainly concerned about doing the right thing by Laudato Si. Today, we're going to try to give you some ideas on how you can do this better. How do we encounter our leaders? How do we engage them in this important work? Our guests today are Paula Gwynn Grant from the Archdiocese of Washington, and John Carr, who heads up the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. I'm going to introduce them a little bit more in a minute, but given that as I said, over 1,100 people registered for this webinar, I think we have struck a nerve. This is one of our biggest attended webinars of the year. But before we do these formal introductions, let me do just a little bit of housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded. A link to the recording will be sent to you soon, within a couple of days at the most. The chat feature is for your use to communicate with one another or with Paz Reagan, who is on standby to help answer your questions. If you have questions of the panelists or of myself, use the Q&A feature in the Zoom platform, and we'll get to those. We probably won't get to all of your questions today, but we will do our best to try and make sure that we get to most of them, or at least a good chunk of them. So let us take a moment to quiet ourselves, to be in God's presence, and to pray, which is what we should always do when we are with one another. This is a prayer from Xavier Jayaraya, I guess, the Jesuit, who wrote this for the Laudato Si movement's prayer book, which is an excellent resource, and I recommend it to you. So let us pray. God, our Father and Mother, you are the source of all power that exists on earth. All powers proceed from you, inviting us to share and participate in its play, each according to our calling, in the service of life on earth. In each passing generation from Old Testament to today, you have raised up leaders and prophets, and they spoke the truth boldly and clearly. You endowed your leaders with needed courage to speak truth to kings and rulers, men and women who felt in their hearts the suffering of the poor and heard the cry of the earth, and use their voices to ease the pain of the powerless and voiceless. Jesus, your death on the cross is a reminder to question and challenge the evil in our leaders. In solidarity with the discarded and abandoned, we need to see and expose the whitewashed sepulchres. The life and death of Jesus, our leader, beckons us to carry the power of his truth in our voices, to heal the wounded world and the creation. We pray to the same Holy Spirit that once acted in Jesus. O Holy Spirit, wake us up out of our personal worlds. Open our eyes to see the pain and suffering of the people and the cry of your creation. While some amass more, many more go hungry. While some take control of others, others live in fear. While some cause climate crisis, others protect and advocate. Help us see and say those things that must be said. Free us from the fear of consequences, and give us the courage to speak the truth with justice and love. With God's power working within us, help us train young prophetic voices and energies to labor to establish the new earth and new heavens, where everyone will use the power shared with them, where there will be no powerful and powerless, where all of us will be instruments of one great power, manifesting many creative dimensions of your love. Amen. So today we are thrilled to have some amazing panelists to help guide this discussion. I will help guide the discussion. They will give lots of great answers to some questions. Each of our guests will have about 10 minutes to respond to 3 questions, which I will ask in a minute. And they will be about how do we encounter our leaders, our church leaders, be they pastors, diocesan staff, bishops, on Laudato Si issues, and then we'll delve more deeply as we hold a conversation with our guests. As I said earlier, please submit your questions in the Q&A, and they will be used during our conversation. As I said, also, we won't be able to get to all of them, but we will try to do so, to get to as many as possible. So, Paula Gwynn Grant is Secretary for Communications for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., where she is responsible for internal and external communications and is media spokesperson and representative for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese, for the representative Cardinal Gregory. Prior to this role, Paula served 5 years as Director of Communications for the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Atlanta. Paula is an Emmy award-winning television broadcaster and radio announcer with over 35 years of marketing and public relations experience. John Carr. John is the founder of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life at Georgetown University. He served for over 20 years as the director of the Department of Justice, Peace, and Human Development at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, directing the conference's public policy and advocacy efforts on major domestic and international issues, as well as sharing Catholic social teaching on human life and dignity, solidarity, faithful citizenship, and care for creation. Full disclosure, John was not only my boss while we both worked at the USCCB, but he has also been a mentor and a friend since my family moved to Washington nearly 3 decades ago. John previously served as Secretary for Social Concerns for the Archdiocese of Washington under Cardinal Hickey. At Georgetown, John is an adjunct professor of theology and a member of the Committee on Investments and Social Responsibility. Finally, John's vision for where the church needed to be headed was the key to founding Catholic Climate Covenant back in 2006. Less clear was John's vision to ask me to start it up, but we'll keep that debate for another time. So let me turn to Paula. So Paula, as a communications director for the Archdiocese of Washington, you have a front row seat to the variety of demands on a bishop, on Cardinal Gregory in this instance, on his time on a day-to-day basis and all of the things that come at him. So given this, let me ask you 3 questions that we hope you can begin to crack for us. The first is, how do I encounter my diocesan or parish leadership and urge them to actively engage in creation care and integral ecology issues, on those issues that are as outlined in Laudato Si? Second question, what are some of the better strategies, the ones that will most likely lead to success and to get our church's leadership attention? What are some of the realities, challenges, and opportunities? And thirdly, how can we be positive and solution-centered and lead with our faith when we are in dialogue with diocesan and parish leadership and staff? So Paula, 3 simple questions. I'll turn it over to you for about 10 minutes or so. Paula, we can't hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted. No.
Me? Can you hear me?
There we go. Bingo.
We don't know the beauty of technology. And so that's one of those things, right? So with our bishops, we have to be flexible and being able to do things like that and not come to them with an attitude or an approach that makes it difficult, right? So we easily solve problems like that. Okay, so it's audio or whatever it may be for the bishop. I think the number one thing is attitude and our approach. Remember that the bishop is the CEO. If we go to a secular example, right, he's the CEO. So at Coca-Cola, they don't go running to the CEO of Coca-Cola about operations issues, about flavors, about how to distribute globally. They need the CEO's okay. Let us be clear. We are not going to proceed without our bishop's permission and blessing and instruction as to how the bishop wants Laudato Si incorporated. But here's the thing. It is our job as staff, and the biggest way you can win with your bishop is to, number one, know what your bishop has to do every day. And so, Dan, like you said, the deal is the bishop has a lot in front of him. Our job as staff is to make it easier and to assist the bishop, not to tell the bishop what to do, but to assist. So how do we assist? How do we stay in dialogue and be a reliable expert on staff to support the bishop? Laudato Si, in my opinion, and what has worked in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., is that make Laudato Si not a standalone issue. I think sometimes we're so busy trying to implement the good that we've received from Pope Francis in Laudato Si that we're approaching our bishops like, we need to do Laudato Si. Of course we do. But the truth is, look at it in the context of the full church. Laudato Si is one encyclical of many. So Laudato Si in truth and in practice, right, is a part of ministry. Laudato Si is a part of our evangelization efforts. So what I would suggest, and what we did again in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., where I'd like to just encourage everybody to go to those two websites for the Archdiocese of Atlanta and also for the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Look at our pages for Laudato Si. You'll see all kinds of strategies and things you can present and emulate and scale to your diocese. But notice how it all gets incorporated into the larger evangelization efforts. After all, we don't want to only talk about conserving water, and also recycling when we're not talking about full parish life, when we're not talking about how and why these things are important. And that's the message that church leaders need to hear, including our bishop. How are we incorporating it and making it a part of the entire ministry of the bishop? Things like taking out all the styrofoam. If you're going to have styrofoam in your chanceries and parishes, we all understand styrofoam now. All right, but I don't think you need the bishop to actually approve switching from styrofoam cups or plates to the more efficient cardboard recyclable type. Some things we can handle. So that's a strategy I would look at. It has worked in other dioceses. That also helps in your dialogue, and it should be a running dialogue with your bishop, not one big conversation and expectation of an answer. Make it an ongoing conversation as part of evangelization, and show your bishop some wins. Hey, here's how we, bishop, just so you know, we got rid of the styrofoam and we now have the recyclable types all throughout the chancery and the parish, and we're saving money by doing that. The more wins and the easier you make it for any executive, including our bishops, to do what they need to do every day, the more we win in getting Laudato Si all throughout. The approach, our attitude, making it a part of all that we do in evangelization. And then lastly, from a communication standpoint, Dan, you asked me, so this is the part I think that is a great takeaway for everyone to consider. Communication. One of the ways you can present a win to your bishop is the public side of Laudato Si. Sometimes we're so intentional about the strategy implementation at parishes and in ministry and at the chancery that we forget the public messaging. So your bishop is constantly preaching, delivering homilies. Why haven't we threaded the Laudato Si message in our public communications? So you can be doing social media posts. Look at Catholic Covenant. They've got just really wonderful posts. Look at other dioceses. Look at the USCCB. Look at the Vatican. Share those social media posts. Create versions of those social media posts for your local diocese. You can do social media. So you need to talk to your communications folks or whoever's managing social media there for the diocese. And at parish level, they can do the exact same thing. Photos can be taken and shared every time a garden is planted, every time recycling is done, Earth Day every year. We know the points on the calendar where we can shine with the Laudato Si messages. This is a win. Your archdiocesan newspaper or magazine can do stories about your Laudato Si efforts. You can create a calendar with the editor, sit down and talk to those colleagues about what are the public stories we are sharing, because that inspires and creates the momentum that your bishop will want to see. And now you can build off of that and you're demonstrating a success, but quite frankly, it's easy to do, right? I mean, of the things in front of us, that's one of the easiest wins. I'll stop there because in the Q&A, Dan, I know we can get at some more, but those are some of the initial strategies. I would like to just end with this. Don't be annoying. Annoying is not a strategy. Let's just remember that, because sometimes, you know, we're well-intentioned, right? Laudato Si. Okay, calm down, calm down. Be intentional and professional, because then your bishop will take you seriously when you present this seriously and in the context of the full diocesan ministry. That's how you win with any executive, really, on any issue. You're creating a dialogue, an ongoing relationship behind wins, behind pushing things forward. And in our case, that means evangelization. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Paula. That was excellent. Thanks. John, I'm going to turn to you and basically have the same three questions. How do we encounter our diocesan or parish leadership and urge them to engage in these issues? What are some of the better strategies to do that? How do we get their attention? And then, you know, how do we develop positive solution-centered responses to these issues? You've had lots of experience with bishops, both as your time at many years at the USCCB. You've probably encountered hundreds of bishops, so you have a lot of experience here. So give us some of your wisdom. How do we make this part of the agenda of a diocese? You're on mute, John. Here we go.
Great to be with you. First of all, I feel like Paula was talking to me. I can be one of the most annoying people on earth when I truly believe in a cause. And that I can tell you from experience, that is not the best approach. So let me begin by saying thank you. Thank you to the Covenant, to Dan and his colleagues. He was very gracious in saying I had something to do with the beginning. This is one of the really great, hopeful signs in our church. And one of the lessons here, it doesn't take just hierarchs or clerics to deliver the message, to stand up for our faith. Lay people, national organizations have come together and are consistent and creative and effective. And so one of the lessons here is reach out to the structures, but build your own structures as well. And I think the Covenant is a great example. The other thing is to say thank you to all the people on this call, this webinar. I love Pope Francis' line about everyday saints. You don't have to, move to Haiti to care about the poor. And people who stand up for our faith and our values and for God's creation are everyday Christians, and I would argue everyday saints. So I want to say thank you for that. I've been asked for advice on how to reach, engage, persuade, and counter Catholic leaders. The first thing is, imagine you were a bishop, imagine you were a pastor. This is not a fun time to be. You got lots of demands and limited resources. You got a very broad constituency and a lot of division. And frankly, some of our folks, and this could be a stereotype, we're beleaguered. We think, we see a new opportunity as a burden. We see the environment and care for creation not as a way to live out our faith, But one more thing to feel bad about, because we're not going to do all that we should. The one thing I would do is try to think strategically about who you reach and how. There are some people you're never going to persuade. I spend a lot of time worrying about those people, and it's wasted effort, frankly. Then there are people who agree with me, and I love those people, and I love spending time with them. They affirm me, and I affirm them. We need to call those folks to action, but we don't need to spend a lot of time. Then we need the third group, the most important group, are the uncommitted, the open but not sold folks. And the reason why I think that's so important, I was one of those people. Dan said I worked for a long time at the Bishops' Conference. I was open to the environmental message, but not enthusiastic. I saw it, frankly, as a diversion for the very heavy agenda we were carrying on poverty and peace and other issues. I saw the environmental movement as sort of elite and powerful, and I was a little jealous because they seemed to be making a lot of progress and we weren't making enough. I saw in some ways as a diversion from the central themes of Catholic social teaching. And I was wrong. I came to believe, with the help of a lot of friends, that it is integral. It is an extension of our teaching. It is a deepening of our faith. But how did I come to that? Well, first, I had to learn to listen, but the people around me had to learn how to talk to me. I did not take well to homilies or lectures or condescending or shaming. How come you don't get this? You don't understand this. I learned to listen to people I respect, people who were in my life, my allies, people who join me in causes, friends who do really good work, who call me to be my best. And I frankly listened to authority. A key person for me was John Paul II, who said this is an integral part of our faith. And I began to understand that this fits. I was unwilling to stop doing, all that we were doing and start up a new project. I had a terrible attitude about that. In fact, this was an extension, a deepening, a fuller expression of who we were. It was biblical, it was theological, it was pastoral, and it was directly connected to my work of trying to lift up the poor. Climate change is the ultimate example of environmental injustice, in that those who do the least to cause the problem suffer the most from its consequences. So, and all that came together for me in Laudato Si and Pope Francis, when he said, we have to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, that we don't have two crises, but one, and that they're together. He placed an environmental ethic at the center of Catholic life, and that challenged me. And he placed a priority for the poor at the center of the environmental movement, which challenged all of us. So what are some lessons from that? I was going to say 10 commandments, but that's too strong. I have 10 suggestions really fast. And Paula said some of this. Begin with faith, not politics. Use language that is appropriate, that makes that clear. We're talking about care for God's creation. Don't be afraid of putting this in the biblical and religious context. For us, St. Francis and Pope Francis are our guides, not Al Gore or whoever the cause of the month is. Second commandment, treat people as leaders with many obligations, pressures, constituencies, and limited time and resources, not as targets. Have some understanding for what they're up against. It's hard. As I said, it's not easy these days to be. Try to provide reasonable, doable opportunities for action. Somebody comes in with a 10-point plan, I go, that's hopeless. If you come in with 2 ideas, Why don't we pray every Sunday for God's creation? Why don't we celebrate a mass around the feast of St. Francis? Why don't we put these few paragraphs from Laudato Si in our bulletin? Why don't we talk to the Social Concerns Committee about including this in our legislative activity? Number 4, offer to help. Don't just sit back and judge. And number 5 is relationships matter. Figure out who the bishop listens to, who the pastor cares about, who are the influential people, who are most persuasive, who supports their work, who gives them money, frankly, who turns them off. There are 2 kinds of people, you know. There are the people you're happy to see, and there are the people that you want to duck into a closet when you see them coming. Figure out who are the people that these leaders want to see. Who will they listen to? As Paula suggested, I think on 5 or 6, integrate, don't isolate. Cares for God's creation. You need to build bridges. One of the worst things we can do is denigrate the work of others at the diocesan and parish level. Those pro-life people, they get all the attention. They're so crabby, you know, blah, 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 blah. We really ought to be doing this. And in so doing, show that we're going to be the crabby ones and we're going to be the ones making demand. Try and find a way to build bridges. Avoid a partisan ideological framework. There is a very Catholic, conservative case for taking on climate change. It begins with the virtue of prudence. You don't have to know everything to know that we're doing damage. And prudence says you got to stop doing the stuff that's doing damage. The idea of sacrificing for others is a part of who we are. The idea of the common good, that's at the essence of Catholic social teaching. Care for the least of these is the test of our judgment. I remember I was lobbying on climate change bill, and I walked in to a Catholic senator, and he said, "What are you talking about? This involves sacrifice. Sacrifice doesn't poll well." I said, "I hope you didn't spend a lot of money finding out that sacrifice doesn't poll well." He said, "Well, what are you asking me to do?" I said, "Well, think of it as a long Lent for us rich people. We have a tradition of fasting and sacrificing for others. We don't need a new religion to embrace this cause. The one we have compels us to act. Urgency is clear. I mean, literally, the fate of the earth is in our hands, but modesty is very useful. Applaud baby steps, affirm and encourage. When somebody does something worthwhile, take a breath before you say, "That was great. Now I'm going to do X, Y, Z." You just be sure and affirm the steps that are taken. Baby steps are okay. Find opportunities where you can. There are places where you're just going to be against a wall. And some people have enough patience to bring down a wall. I don't. So I got to find a way around it. I got to find a different path, frankly. So join the Catholic Climate Covenant. Join an environmental group. Work with the schools. Do solar in your neighborhood, but continue to press. But there, you may have an obstacle that can't be moved, and don't let that endanger your faith or destroy your capacity to do this work. Number 9, climate may be bad news. I mean, what we're doing is horrible, but the gospel is good news, and we ought to act like it. Dan and I had an old friend saying, "No one likes a grim do-gooder." We ought to present this as an opportunity to live the faith, not some dour doomsday sort of message. This is a way to be who we really are in our own time situation. And then number 10, this is the Lord's work. This is our faith in action. This is a biblical response. This is Catholic social teaching at work. This is proclaiming the gospel and renewing the earth. And I think this within the church will be a bottom-up movement. That's 1,000 people on this call. It'll be a top-down movement. We couldn't have a better leader than Pope Francis. And this will be a middle-out movement because you have found ways to engage and encourage leaders to take steps to reflect our common values. Thank you for the opportunity.
John, thanks so much. That was brilliant as usual. We expect nothing less from you. And Paula, thank you also for your wisdom and kind of being in the trenches. So lots of questions are coming in, and I'll ask some of those and probably some of my own. We're getting ready for our spring appeal. Everyone on the call, note that you'll be getting a fundraising appeal from us. And with the United Nations recent assessment of the state of climate change around the world, it's grim. Talk about grim news. And we were debating internally about how do we reach people, and do we go, do we do this positively, or do we scare the bejesus out of them? Pardon the language, but how do we persuade? How do we engage? And I guess, Paula, I would turn to you as a communications professional. What would your advice be? Like, how do we reach people when the news is so dire and the speed at which this needs to be tackled seems to be stuck in reverse almost, or at least in neutral? So how would you respond to that? How do we reach people? Is it with shock and awe as we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, or is it something more positive? How would you advise?
I think, positive is always the way to go. I always worry about any negative strategy because you can't win with negative. Negative is not designed to win. So let's come out of our own issue of Laudato Si, and let's all just for a minute think of whatever other issue. I'll tell you one that jumps at me, and I'm very pro-life, but I'm telling you, we've got to stop with the aborted fetuses and putting them on the steps of the Capitol. And I understand and support that message, but I don't agree with that strategy for communicating that message. You see the difference? We can't say I'm going to gross you out and then expect you to listen, because that's not human. When we as humans receive information that causes an emotional reaction, the correct and very human response is to turn away, to turn off, to retreat. That is what we're supposed to do to keep ourselves safe. That's how we process information. So we can't, as communicators of a message, think we're going to undo biology and human reaction to information. We have to remember how information is received, and because we are also wanting the information to be used. So there's a call for action. So my encouragement is you first have to hook people with a message that resonates. First of all, go with a message that touches everybody or most people. Everybody wants clean water. Everybody understands about the impact of a lot of plastic now. There have been enough news stories and enough public education by advocates all across the spectrum. So go with the messages that are common, that are everyday, that resonate with people, and that are positive in terms of being received, so that you can then get action for people to do. Because in the end, that's what we as church are always trying to do, right? The purpose of our evangelization is to create the action of moving toward faith and relationship with Christ. So we have to remember our whole goal. And I would say then, also don't wait on other people. I want to acknowledge, because it's coming up in the chat, there have been many religious communities, men and women religious, who have been on this message of Laudato Si and care for creation, and they've been doing an outstanding job. So sometimes we also forget and try to do communications on our own instead of linking with advocates like that who already have a message out on a wider stage. So we need to partner together, because we're all saying the same thing, but we're saying it in silos. Let's get our message coordinated okay? And that way we also have more power and therefore more impact. Because if we can show the public that this issue is important because it is affecting the poor, and that's usually communities of color, where folks are of lower income and they are lower resourced. This is what Laudato Si addresses. We understand it. So if we're going to really talk about it, let's talk fully about it. And that way now we got people listening so they can do. So let's communicate our own message on our own platforms, social media. And for those who are saying your diocesan papers are not supportive, okay, then your diocesan paper is not a source. I need you to remember you have a parish website. I need you to remember you have parish social media. You have other outlets that are our own where we control our own message. Then if you can get Catholic media who are supportive to then amplify your message, great. Catholic media that do not support this Laudato Si message, don't waste your energy and effort, as John said. Don't keep banging your head against a wall. If the answer is no, move on to where the answer is a maybe or a firm yes.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. John, you want to weigh in on that question?
Sure. We've tried scaring people. Some of us are scared. Some of us have become immune. It's my experience that ain't it awful is not a message. We can do better is a message that empowers. And I think for you and for us, we have a we can do better message, that what is being done. Two other quick things. Pope Francis teaches us in just our own experience, the human is more important than the statistical. The faces are more important than theories. The passion for this, for many of us, comes from the fact that kids are at risk, families are at risk. And so lead with that. The other thing, if there was one thing that unites the church in the United States, left, right, center, liberal, conservative, north, south, Anglo, African American, Hispanic, we're all worried about our kids and whether we'll be able to pass our faith on to them. And I don't think there's anything at work in the Catholic community that creates a greater opening for a lot of young people than Pope Francis' message of care for creation as an integral part of Catholic life. So I would say lead with the human, make clear we can make things better, and say this is a way to engage and involve and follow the lead of young people. To go to a pastor and say, you know, how about this, how about that? One of the things would be, how do we get our young people involved? Cleaning up a creek and then, you know, a little bit of reflection on Laudato Si would be a good start.
Yeah, great. Thank you, John. Yeah, another question. Well, first of all, John, we have to have your 10 commandments. So if you have those written up, great. If not, we'll transcribe them from this this video. But those were terrific, and a lot of people are asking for them. The other question is, so you know, we have in the last couple of years we have had sort of 3 major initiatives happening within the church at one time. So one is that came out a year and a half ago is the Laudato Si action platform from the Vatican, which the Covenant is trying to manage in the US, or at least help promote. The second is this new emphasis on understanding and embracing the Eucharist and what all that means to be Catholic, how we need to have a much greater appreciation for that central sacrament in our Catholic life. And then the third is the Synod. So, you know, there's all of these things going on right now, major initiatives within the Catholic community. You both talked a little bit about how do we integrate Laudato Si efforts within this wider, Paula, you said evangelization. John, you said, you know, we can't just be one issue, we have to embrace and see this stuff as interconnected. Pope Francis calls this integral human development. But how would you advise, like, what do we do first? Or can we do them all together? how do we see these three big initiatives interrelated? And I'll leave Paula, I don't know if you want to respond first or John.
I'd like to hear John's comments on this. My suggestion for this is you have to do them all together because of just what you said. They're happening. They've already been presented to us as the church, right? So these are the simultaneous, and this is what we have to understand. Pope Francis didn't release the encyclical Laudato Si in isolation. He too is managing all these things. So we're called to do the same thing in terms of approaching the sharing of this message. And the beauty of it, it is all integrated. It's actually all the same message, which is why we can do this all together. So the strategies on communicating a message is you can talk about this, and John will give you a bit more because he talked about how this is theology, this is Catholic teaching, this is the Eucharist in action, this is the message of the church, the gospel message. This is all one main message with various elements. So I think you do them all together and you use the strategies and the platforms that we have control of, our own social media, our parish bulletins, our parish websites, diocesan communications channels where you have them available. And we need to stand together in our messaging to amplify it. And I think all together is the only way to really go.
Great. Thank you, Paula. John, you have any? You're muted. John, you're muted.
I only do 20 dialogues a year. You'd think I could learn how to mute and unmute myself.
If I had a nickel, right?
We have to be careful about using and abusing those processes within the church. If you're going to engage with the Eucharistic revival, you need to be really a part of the Eucharistic revival. You can't sort of helicopter in and say, don't forget about God's creation. Or if you're part of the synod, you can't be, people, when they see your hand up, they shouldn't say, oh, here it comes. You know, you got to commit. Having said that, I'm going to disobey my advice, which is the very nature of a sacramental church helps us understand our relationship to creation. There are a lot of people who think much more deeply than I do. But the nature of the Eucharist and the sacraments is God is present in all sorts of ways, and we have to respect and honor and care for his presence. And we demonstrate our respect for God by care for his creation. The Synod, and my colleague Kim Daniels is very much a part of that and explains to me regularly all the hopes we should have for that, and I'm buying in. One of my worries is it will turn us inward. A lot about who's included, excluded, who decides, all that's really important. But the purpose is mission. And part of the mission is care for the least of these and care for the earth. And so within the Synod process, we ought to be reminding people that, in the words of one of the key Synod leaders, we need an outward looking church that is healthy inside. And it was Pope Francis who said a church turned inward is not healthy. Laudato Si, care for creation, can help us get healthier by focusing on why we need to be a church of listening and accountability, because we have a mission to engage and to advance.
Thank you, John. Yeah, and Paz is posting things on the chat as we speak, resources from the covenant. One of them being, we did a webinar actually on these other initiatives of the church, the Eucharistic revival and the synod. So you can go back and watch that as well. So I'm going to try to squish two questions together, probably not quite similar, but anyway, one question is, and I think we've all, Paula, you've already addressed this somewhat, but I'd like to bring it back up again. Part of the question is, we have so many of our church leaders focused on one issue, or at least we perceive them as being focused on one issue, which is abortion, which is an incredibly important issue. We shouldn't lose sight of that.
Okay.
versus climate or immigration or poverty questions, right? I mean, we don't hear them speaking out as much on those types of questions. So that's one part of it. But I think related to that is this polarization that we have felt in our church and in our society. John, you're much more of a political observer than I, and have much more wisdom on this. But this polarization that has crept into our politics, it's always been there, but it seems in hyperdrive right now. It just, if I stand for this, the other person's going to stand for that, and there's no middle ground, there's no compromise. How do we address and that polarization has also crept into our church? And John, I know you've done a number of dialogues with the initiative on these questions, but how do we wrestle with that? Climate is certainly one of those issues that has elicited a lot of polarization, even as the impacts of climate change have become much clearer and are impacting almost everyone in the country, never mind around the world. So anyway, there's a lot there, but how do we overcome this polarization, and how do we help our leaders understand how to connect some of these issues? What's your best advice for that? So I'll let, maybe John, why don't you go first this time? You're muted again, John.
I have to plug in my computer.
Oh, okay.
Or I'm going to leave the dialogue, which may be okay with people. The first thing to overcome polarization is don't be polarized. If you don't like one issue politics, don't practice it. Don't become the mirror image of the people you're unhappy with. One of the things we can do is to be really clear that Pope Francis didn't invent care for our common home. One of my favorite stories is Pope Benedict the 16th was probably one of his greatest contributions to the social teaching of the church, was anchoring concern for creation deeply in our social teaching. And I remember when he gave a particularly powerful appeal for the earth and for God's people. The Weather Service reporter, I forget whether it was AP or Reuters or somebody else, said Pope Benedict felt so strongly about this, he even wore green vestments. And of course, it's the 24th Sunday of Ordinary Time, and every priest in the world wore green vestments. But for the secular reporter, that was a big thing. But the person who played a decisive role in my conversion was John Paul II. And this is something that brings the church together. We ought to get over, I'm a John Paul II Catholic, I'm a Benedict person, I'm part of Team Francis. On care for creation, we're all on the same team. So we ought to remind people, this goes back to Genesis, not Laudato Si. This is a part of who we are. St. Francis was ours before he belonged to the environmentalists. And Pope Francis is our leader, but he's not the first pope that called us to conversion on this. So the other thing is really try and pull ourselves out of the partisan bickering. The Republican Party had a major role in the environmental movement early on. It was Richard Nixon who started the Environmental Protection Agency, and it's sad to see how the sorting out of our politics has affected everything. We used to have a pro-life Democrats, and we had a lot of pro-environment Republicans, and now we have neither. And that's a loss for the unborn, for the environment, for politics.
I think that is the key. And we have to really look at the whole scope, because we get locked into our moment right now. We have to realize the church has been here for how many years, right? And this message has been with us and in our belief all of these years. And every man who occupies the office of the papacy, the Pope, that's our Pope. The Pope belongs to all of us. We're not Pope Benedict the 16th Catholics. We're not Pope Francis Catholics. We are Catholics. who support our Pope, and we listen to our Pope. And I think the main thing is what John just instructed. From a communication standpoint, what often happens is we can get caught in the inertia of the society we are witnessing in. So you end up, as church, you accidentally use the language of the polarized secular society. That as church, we have other language. And when we're crafting our messages of evangelization, remember, when we're speaking into the greater society, let's not utilize their language that polarizes. Let's not get caught up in the inertia of the political arguments. This isn't political. This isn't. This is our belief. This is our faith. This is the right thing to do. Our messages should reflect that and cut through, therefore, the polarization and the negativity. That's what witnessing in the public square is all about, creating messages that cut through whatever are the arguments in the greater society at that time. That's our challenges as Catholic witnesses. And we need to do a good job and be vigilant, not to, just as people, get caught up. We have to make sure we're clear. We have to make sure that we are very Catholic in how we respond. I even tell folks, if you're going to tell a reporter no, do you know you are evangelizing in how you tell them no? I'm just saying, I could be as nasty as a secular newsroom editor, or I could give you a very Catholic response. So to a reporter, I'm like, hey, we're not going to be able to help you out on that story. Maybe we'll catch you on the next one. Hey, really good. Hope you have a good day. Blessings to you and your family. They're always caught off guard. Nobody's nice to them all day. Hospitality wins the day. Okay. So remember, annoying is not a strategy. Being polarizing is not a strategy. We have to remember a Catholic witness threads throughout everything we do. The way we communicate, what we communicate, and how we communicate.
That's excellent. Thank you, Paula. Yeah. John, go ahead.
Suggestions. I've been known to quote popes a lot, and I don't recommend it as a way to engage. But when you do, you might put up a powerful quote from John Paul II and say, who said this? Put up a powerful quote from Pope Benedict and say, who said this? And a powerful quote from Pope Francis, and make clear the one thing that is consistent in the last half century of popes is a call to Catholics to care for God's creation.
Excellent, excellent idea. I wanted to come back to you, Paula, on you because you've talked about evangelization a lot, and I think you just clarified for me what you mean by evangelization, which and correct me if I'm wrong, but which is how do we comport ourselves as Catholics with each other, with our leaders, and with the public. And I think your response to a reporter who's asking for a comment on maybe some neuralgic question to, I'm not going to, I can't help you with that today, but call me next time. I think that's what we have to. I think if we think about how we are witness to the greater world as Catholic Christians and what it looks like, I think that is evangelization regardless
Precisely.
of, so thank you for
before
that
we can use words, right? Before we use words, right? People are looking at us. So we don't want to turn folk off before they've heard our message. They were like, well, if Catholics act like that, I don't want to be a Catholic. So we have to remember. We have to remember.
That's an important theme, I think, throughout this conversation. One last question, because we are almost out of time. So, and maybe it's not something that could be answered briefly, but I'm intrigued by this idea of how do we build relationships with those who have a relationship with the leader we're trying to get to? And I don't know, John, I'm sure you've had a few experiences of this. Maybe just a quick anecdote of how that has happened for you. Maybe you don't have to name names, but can you provide through your many years of experience in the church on how that works and how that was effective in an instance or two?
Well, maybe a way to do that and not get in trouble would use a secular alternative. We were very anxious to get a member of the Senate to co-author a piece of the original cap and trade climate bill that would set aside a lot of the resources for lifting up the poor, the people who are most victimized by climate change in our own country and around the world. The cap and trade was going to create resources. How were those to be used? And when we thought about that, we said, okay, who ought to be in the room? Who knows him? Who does he respect? Who is not campaigning against him? Who has not called him immoral? Who does he listen to? Is there an unlikely source? This was a Republican member? Is it a Republican leader who really cares about this? In this state, could we have somebody who's very much affected by the neglect of the environment in terms of their own lives and their own kids? Who gives this person money? Do any of us know? Who in authority? Who in the church? Our church, but also ecumenical churches, Protestant churches, knows this guy. He's an Episcopalian. Does he get along with the bishop? Does he not get along with the bishop? And we put together our best team, our best arguments, and we began by thanking him for his leadership, which some people thought that was not the place to begin because he wasn't a strong enough leadership. But we were able to persuade him to become a co-sponsor, and he became a champion. In the parish, in the diocese, who does the pastor listen to? Who does he depend on? Who gives? Who? Some of us, we just don't get along, and we're not the best ambassadors. Who are the people who really build up the community of our parish and he will listen to? Who really knows young people? Put a young person in the meeting with him and say, this is really important. But I think activists, people like us, are very good figuring out strategies to win a vote, we ought to be strategic about how to win the support and participation of our leaders in the Catholic community. And that's simply a smart thing to do.
Thank you both. We are out of time, and the hour has gone way too fast for me because I would love to kind of continue this conversation. John and Paula, I know you have day jobs, so we're going to let you go. But can you just in the chat just do that hand clap thing at the bottom for our two guests? They are amazing. So much wisdom has been imparted, and we are just deeply indebted to both of you for your time and your expertise. I do want to just before we leave, I want to share one more slide, if I can find it here, which is some of the resources that we have to offer you at Catholic Climate Covenant. We have an amazing team. If you don't know our staff, you should get to know them. They are top-notch, top to bottom. And we are just blessed. And Taza Reagan, who is behind the scenes running this webinar, many of you know, we're going to make her our development director because she pulls in more money than any of us. But anyway, these are some of the resources. Some she has produced, some others are producing. So please go to our website and look at some of these amazing resources that can help you in your path to help leaders. I think that's it. We are going to transcribe those 10 commandments that John left with us. This webinar will be available shortly for you to review again. Let's thank Paz, let's thank Paula, let's thank John, and mostly I want to thank all of you for attending this webinar, for your attention, for your excellent questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to many of them, but the conversation online and in this video was just absolutely rich. So thank you. God bless you. Have a good day. And we will see you at our next webinar. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Paula.